Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse, and in this recording I'm going to be talking about Mars retrograde in Leo and Cancer beginning December 2024. So let's just get some dates out of the way to start with. We have Mars entering the shadow zone on the 5th of October. That was at 17 degrees of Cancer. We then have Mars stationing retrograde at 6 degrees and 10 minutes of Leo on the 6th of December. We have Mars then stationing direct on the 24th of February 2025 at 17 degrees of Cancer. And then Mars will exit the shadow zone on the 2nd of May at 6 degrees and 10 minutes of Leo. So the full cycle takes us really from the 5th of October right through to the 2nd of May 2025. It's a long period of time. So Mars goes retrograde roughly every 2 years and 2 months. And generally in forward motion, when Mars is moving normally in direct motion, he will spend roughly about 2 months in each house as he moves around the chart. But when he is going retrograde, it means, of course, he's going back on himself. And so what we find is that Mars then ends up staying up to around 8 months in one particular area of our chart. As I was saying before, when I was giving the dates, we're going right from the beginning of October to the beginning of May next year. And in the background, the accompaniment of the police or ambulance, the urgency, the kind of warning going on in the background as I'm reading these dates out and kind of getting to grips with this upcoming retrograde, which for me personally is going to spend 8 months in my 12th house. Mars went into my 12th house around September the 13th, 16th, I think it was. And he won't be out of that part of my chart until May next year. So yeah, it's a long period of time. Who needs sleep anyway? So Mars is going to be affecting my sleep. Mars is also going to be hopefully bringing me some interesting dreams as well. We'll talk more about the effects of Mars as I move forwards. So if we think about it then, if Mars is spending this extra long period of time in a certain area of our charts, 1 or 2 houses, it is moving through 2 different signs this particular retrograde. But either way, 1 or 2 areas of our life is getting this supercharged focus from Mars. But generally speaking, if we sort of think about the average lifespan of about 72 years or so, that means that Mars will, on average, retrograde twice through each of the houses in our personal chart. So we get probably 2 chances to incorporate the messages of each retrograde period that Mars brings. So that shows us then how important it is for us to tap into the meaning and the message and the energy of Mars retrograde. Generally, when Mars is retrograde, because Mars is our inner warrior, he is associated with our energy and drive and will. He is connected to our goals. He talks about activity, sometimes ambition in some ways as well, because of the idea of conquering and competition. So this is a very hot and fiery type of energy that we're dealing with Mars. But when Mars goes retrograde, because the planet is appearing to go backwards, firstly, we are internalizing that energy. So we need to go within and speak to our inner warrior and ask them, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's your motivation for this? What are you fighting for here. And when I say here, I mean the area of life that Mars is activating. So wherever Mars is moving in your chart, whatever house he's activating in your chart, that is where you need to be asking, what am I doing here and why am I doing it? What's my motivation? What's my goal here? What's my end goal? What's my mission? Why do I feel fired up about this? Or why am I passionate about this? And what can happen, of course, is that because it's going retrograde, the questions arise because we suddenly feel demotivated. I can't be bothered. I don't know why I was even thinking about this. Why am I doing this? What's the point in all of this? I feel frustrated, or I feel angry, or there's some kind of conflict going on in this part of life. So we start to ask a lot of questions, which purposefully, from Mars's point of view, is going to help to clear the way so that we are putting our efforts into something that's going to be worth it, that we will make that win, or we will get that prize, we will strengthen ourselves, or it will show that we are strong. So Mars going retrograde, sometimes when we sort of meet this energy, we find it a bit frustrating because we just want to be getting on with things normally with Mars in direct motion, but we can't when it is in retrograde motion. Now, Mars will start that retrograde in the sign of Leo. So this is on, as I said before, 6th of December at 6 degrees 10 minutes of Leo, right on my ascendant. Thanks, Mars. So Mars will station retrograde. And we initially get that sudden feeling of maybe like the rug has been pulled from under our feet. Erin Sullivan, in her book Retrograde Planets, talks about how it's very interesting that the connections between the Sun and Mars, the trines between the Sun and Mars, fall just before and just after the retrograde. So the sort of upshot of that is that very often before the retrograde happens, we start to really feel like, oh, everything's going really well. And the trine between the Sun and Mars will be on the 27th of November, Sun traveling through Sagittarius. So yes, it's all like big horizons and lucky breaks and this kind of feeling that everything is opening up and it's all one big adventure, isn't it great? And then something occurs around the Mars retrograde, 6th of December, which makes us sort of come up short. It's like I'm thinking about Sagittarius being a sign associated with traveling, and how it's almost like hitting the brakes. Somehow, for some reason, we've got to hit the brakes and stop. And Mars in Leo is related to our creative energy. Leo is all about the artist. It's associated with creative self-expression. It is, of course, the lion. So we get all the symbolism of the brave lion, the lion heart. But when Mars goes retrograde in Leo, it's kind of bringing up the cowardly lion archetype from the Wizard of Oz. And yeah, we've got to find our heart. We've got to figure out, like, what truly inspires me. What do I want to create here on planet Earth? There's also the energy of wanting to be seen and heard. This is also Leo as well. Leo is ruled by the Sun. So yes, it absolutely wants to be seen. And with Mars going through Leo, we kind of fight to be seen, or we expend energy on wanting to be seen. We take risks because we want to be seen. We go out there and we compete because we want to be seen and heard. But the retrograde means that maybe now we're not getting the applause, we're not getting the attention that we wanted. It can be a little bit difficult for the ego with Mars retrograde in Leo. So we just have to be conscious that this kind of energy is in play. We might feel it within ourselves, or we might meet it in another person, that there's some egos that are struggling a little bit because Mars has gone retrograde. The Sabian symbol of Mars station retrograde is going to be the constellation of stars shine brilliantly in the night sky. So as I mentioned before, this symbol is actually the symbol of my ascendant, so one that I'm very familiar with, and clearly it can have a relationship to astrology. But when we're talking about it symbolically, there is very much a story here about finding meaning. When we look up to the stars, generally we are starting to think beyond ourselves. We're starting to imagine, what does that up there see down here? We try to see ourselves from a different perspective. We're trying to understand the bigger picture. And maybe with Mars stationing on this degree, it is indeed saying there is a bigger picture here. And therefore we've got to place our actions in the context of the bigger picture. So this Sabian symbol reminds us that there are patterns and cycles in everything, and what we are dealing with is bigger than ourselves. And I think that's very important for Mars retrograde in Leo. I was just saying before how Leo loves to have all of the attention and can be a bit of a prima donna when it doesn't get that attention. So it is almost like the retrograde on this particular Sabian symbol is kind of saying, don't be a prima donna about this, because there's something much bigger happening that you are connected with. You know, this is something that is for you. This is something that you are part of, that you are an integral part of. And so if things are not working as you would want them to, if things have stopped or slowed down, or there's a delay, or there's a conflict, Mars retrograde, maybe it is about remembering that there is something else going on behind all of this, and therefore perhaps whatever is happening is necessary for that process. So it's not personal. On the 12th of December, 6 days after stationing retrograde, Venus and Mars will form an opposition with one another. So Mars still in Leo, Venus in Aquarius. Of course, Venus and Mars are the lovers of the zodiac, and so this can mean that perhaps some sparks are flying. It's also important to note, however, that although this can speak of conflicts in relationships or about relationships of all kinds, it can also speak to a split between what we think we want and what is actually good for us. So any conflicts that are going on around this time, internally or externally, maybe there is something about trying to pull your, almost like pull your pride and pull your energy into line with your heart. So don't fight with your heart. On the 3rd of January, Mars makes its next major aspect, which is the big one, the opposition to Pluto. So I just want to kind of point out that there are actually two major aspects in this Mars retrograde period that are more challenging. There are also helpful aspects, so we have a nice balance here, but I do want to point these ones out. We're going to have an opposition between Mars and Pluto. Pluto by this point will have gone into Aquarius, and there will be a square as well between Mars and Chiron. So just to set the scene, the first square between Mars and Chiron was on the 13th of October 2024. The first opposition between Mars and Pluto was on the 3rd of November, or will be, because I'm recording this on the 17th of October. So the first of those oppositions between Mars and Pluto begins on the 3rd of November 2024. And so I'm giving these dates because that will give you some idea of when things start. Pay attention to what goes on around those dates. So for example, we've just had 13th of October, we've just had Mars square to Chiron. So for me personally, I had an old favourite reappear, which is a little bit of an ear infection, and I'm also starting to get some backache. So it's like Mars has just decided to give me two things. Thanks for that, Mars. Anyway, so I'm aware that these things are in play. So I immediately made sure that I've got some spray for my ear. I booked an appointment with my ear consultant person, and I made sure that I've been doing my exercises to stop the problem with my back from getting any worse, and, treating it as it should be. And also thinking about the meaning of those things. What am I not wanting to hear? Where am I feeling insecure? It's my lower back, so it's connected with my root chakra and also sacral chakra. So where am I finding it difficult to feel rooted and grounded? And where am I finding it difficult to create? Where am I holding back from creating? So this is just an example of how I work with this kind of thing. But just pay attention. What is happening? What's coming up around these dates? 13th of October and the 3rd of November. It's before the retrograde kicks in, because these events may take up to around the end of April to resolve. So this is because we're going to have 3 of these aspects, 3 squares between Mars and Chiron, 3 oppositions between Mars and Pluto. And so we are getting 3 attempts here, 3 tries. Mars is telling us we need to keep coming back to this for some reason. Mars opposite to Pluto on the 3rd of January 2025. Very often we can meet this kind of energy with frustration, because Pluto is about power. Mars is the one who is the warrior, like I was saying before. Pluto, power and control. So we're wrestling for control. We're fighting to change things, or we're fighting to keep everything the same. We don't want things to change because it's in opposition. Either way, it can play out. So Mars opposite Pluto is some kind of big struggle. It might be an internal struggle rather than struggling with somebody else. It might be that we're afraid of things changing, or we kind of feel like everything's going to spin out of control unless I do this. And if you're getting some kind of prompt that you've got to take action now before everything falls apart, try to just stop and think, because Mars tends to want to act. He's reactive instead of kind of initiating things, which is what we normally do when Mars is in direct motion. The retrograde means that we become very reactive, and we become particularly reactive when Mars slips back into Cancer. This is on the 6th of January. So we have this very explosive, argumentative Mars opposition to Pluto. It's feisty, and we're kind of feeling like I just want to get ahead here. I just want to get control here. I don't want this person to tell me what to do. All of these kinds of things. Then Mars goes back into Cancer, and the energy changes. And now what's being stirred up is a lot of emotional content. The sign Cancer, stuff from the past, stuff from family. It's a bit of a regressive energy when it's working in shadow. And something is being stirred up. It's being stirred up because it needs to be. We need to be aware of what is underneath everything. Like I said before, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why is this? What is motivating me? And Mars is going deep with Cancer. We're going deep into our past. We're trying to get to the root of everything, the root of all of this stuff, what you were told when you were young, and what your family kind of prized as being a warrior, or what your family prized as being strong. What does it mean to be strong for you? And what messages did you receive as a child? Mars going into Cancer is going to explore some of this. Now, that can be a very emotional period. So this is where we need to just be aware that our emotions are being triggered. We are reacting, like I said before, we potentially are reacting to things instead of quietly responding to what is happening. 16th of January, this is the midpoint of the retrograde period, and it is symbolized by the sun opposite to Mars. So again, we've got that tension between the sun and Mars. And if you imagine, it's rather like a full moon phase. So at the full moon, we have the moon and sun opposite to one another, but now the spotlight is on Mars. Anything that hasn't come out in the retrograde period now tends to be highlighted. This is like the crisis point, or this is the point when you kind of go, oh, that's what this is about. That's what this is for. I get it now. I understand. So everything comes to a head with the sun opposite to Mars. And like I say, it doesn't have to be a negative, oh my God, everything's just awful kind of moment, but things are peaking. The energies of this retrograde are at a peak point now. We can see things far more clearly because the sun is illuminating Mars. And now we start to come down a little from this very, very heady energy. 23rd of January, Mars will form a sextile to Uranus. This is really nice. We start to get this invitation to do something different, to act differently. However, we've got to get around these mental tracks, because also on the same date, Mercury is going to oppose Mars. Mercury will be in Capricorn at this point. So the head is saying, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. Whereas Uranus, which is almost like the higher mind, is saying you can do this. You just need to do something different than before. You are allowed to be free. You are free to change things. You are free to do things differently. 25th of January, Venus will then form a trine to Mars. This is better now, because earlier we had that opposition between Venus and Mars that was saying we were struggling with whether to kind of follow what's in our hearts, or whether to kind of just keep fighting for something that we think we want. Now we've kind of got on board with what we actually truly need, and having a much more heart-centered focus as far as our goals and our passions are concerned. So this is Venus trine to Mars on the 25th of January. On the 4th of February, Mars will form the second of its squares to Chiron. Mars square to Chiron can feel disarmed. So we kind of feel a bit vulnerable. Mars wants to be strong all the time because he's the warrior. He wears his armor. And, we need to do that to go and do battle in life. But Chiron speaks of wounding and pain. So now we have some kind of wounding or pain that's maybe about our identity, or, who we think of ourselves to be. Chiron is in Aries. And maybe sometimes we don't feel like we belong. Maybe that's what the hurting is about. I feel like I don't belong here in this place, or in this family, in this work situation. Something is making me feel vulnerable or weak. But actually this is helpful, because we kind of need to know our weaknesses. We need to know where we might need to be a little bit stronger. And we also need to know what our triggers are, because sometimes if we feel wounded and hurt and we are reacting from that place, then that's not necessarily going to be best for us or best for the people around us. So Mars square to Chiron will help us address this. On the 9th of February, we will have Mars trine to Saturn. Now we're getting stronger. Now we're getting a plan. Now we're starting to get things together. I feel much more together. I'm getting things in order. Saturn is very accomplished. The trine is a kind of flowing energy. So we're now really getting things in order. And Mercury also steps into all of this as well. 23rd of February, Mercury forms a trine to Mars. So it's almost like we get this feeling of, I'm getting a plan. I've seen what's wrong. Now I have a plan. Now I've got my head straight. Mercury trine to Mars. And then finally, on the 24th of February, Mars will station direct. And so now we start to get this feeling things are turning around. We start to get a sense that the energy is beginning to flow again. It's in the sign of Cancer, 17 degrees of Cancer, and it's going to be on the Sabian symbol, a hen scratching the ground to find nourishment for her progeny. So with this particular symbol in play, we're now being shown that this is possible. We can find the nourishment that we need. We find what we need for the progeny. So the progeny, we could just say, these are all the projects. These are all the things that you want to do. These are all the things that you want to do in life. These are all the plans that you've been kind of working on whilst Mars was retrograde. All the things that you thought you couldn't do, but now have realized that you can do. Now there is nourishment available for this. Now there is energy available for this. And there's also a kind of protective edge as well to this Sabian symbol. So maybe there's something here about now we know what we need to protect. Now we know what is worth fighting for. We then have that trine between the Sun and Mars. This will be on the 8th of March. So remember right before we went into the retrograde, there was a moment of, oh wow, everything's kind of going really well. And then suddenly we get the scratching of the record player, the screeching of the brakes, everything stopped. Now we've got a reverse. We have things opening up, this feeling that suddenly, my energy has come back. And now I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm fighting for. I know what I want. And then we get these final aspects to Mars and Pluto. The square to Chiron, as I mentioned before, 26th of March, the opposition to Pluto, 27th of April. So we now are able to take positive action to protect ourselves better now that we know our wounds and our triggers, Mars square to Chiron. And then the final opposition between Mars opposite Pluto. For some people, it might be finally a willingness to let go of what we've been holding on to and allow for change to happen instead of fighting against it. So the final opposition between Mars and Pluto should hopefully make us much more aware of what is in our control and what isn't, and help us to channel our energies effectively into the transformation or change that we want to happen. So as you can hear, this is a super, super dynamic period of time with Mars retrograde, making all of these connections, the Sabian symbols that are animated here. It's going to be a really important period of time for us to reflect and review and allow for a slowdown. I think it's one of the most difficult things with Mars retrograde. For myself, I know that I find it very, very difficult when I want something, and when I want something to happen, I want it to happen yesterday. I hate the waiting. I absolutely detest it. It's because I've got loads of Aries in my chart, Aries ruled by Mars. But sometimes we have to be patient. It has to take time, in the same way as an acorn takes a very, very long time to grow into an oak tree. Sometimes things need that amount of time to get strong, to form in the right way that will stand the test of time. So Mars retrograde is the time to be super patient if you possibly can be. And forewarned is forearmed. Pay attention to the dates, particularly to the squares to Chiron, the oppositions to Pluto, and that opposition to the Sun at the center point of the retrograde as well. Knowing those are there is half the battle. So this brings me to the end of this exploration of Mars retrograde in Leo and Cancer. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please do click a like and subscribe. It always helps the algorithm. And if you would like to hear more from me, I have all of my links in the box below to my website, Substack, social media, and Patreon. I will see you again soon, and in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.